Thank you very much. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here today and to welcome all of you to talk about these critically important issues. You've heard a lot about the reasons why the MEK should be delisted as a foreign terrorist organization. You're aware of the grave risk that the residents at Camp Ashraf are in and some of the steps that need to be taken to protect them. I'd like to talk a little bit not only about those issues, but also about the strategic interest of the United States and what I think our policy should be to achieve the specific objectives that we're most concerned about today, but also to ensure the long-term security of the United States and our friends and allies around the world. The fact is that the regime in Tehran today has all of the characteristics of a continuing, permanent threat to international peace and security. It seeks weapons of mass destruction. It supports, in fact, it is the central banker for international terrorism. And this regime is one of the most brutal repressors of its own people anywhere on the planet. 3 strikes and this regime needs to be overthrown, and that should be the policy of the United States. Now, you know, regime change is a controversial policy. We've got a mixture of Republicans and Democrats here today. Within the past few months, you know, we just accomplished regime change in Libya, and I'm proud of that, too. That's the way the United States has to lead. I can tell you, I had the responsibility, I was one of the people who negotiated with the government of Libya back in 2003 and 2004 to eliminate their nuclear weapons program. Can you imagine what would have been happening the past 6 months or so if he still had a nuclear weapons program? But he forfeited whatever legitimacy we gave him by the steps he took to suppress his own people and by his threat to return to international terrorism. The fact is there are some regimes whose behavior ultimately will not change. They're not going to be affected by the outside world. They're not going to reform, because to do so would mean changing the regime itself. And I think that's the nature of the regime in power in Tehran today. We've tried a lot of different steps over the years to get this regime to conform to international norms in the area of nuclear weapons and many others. And they've all failed. We've tried diplomacy and negotiations with the regime. Let me do a little verb declension. Negotiations with the regime in Tehran over its nuclear weapons have failed. Negotiations are failing. Negotiations will fail. We've tried sanctions. Economic sanctions. Economic sanctions have failed, are failing, and will fail to change the regime's behavior. Now, this is all very unattractive, no doubt about it. We don't want to contemplate the use of military force against Iran's nuclear weapons program. But as Senator McCain said back in 2008, if your choice is between looking at an Iran with nuclear weapons and looking at strikes against its nuclear weapons program, there's no question that you have to look at the military option. I think there's a way to avoid getting to that point, however, and that's to overthrow the regime. And the sooner we do it, the less likelihood that the regime will have achieved nuclear weapons first. Just because the options are unattractive doesn't mean you have to pick one of them. If you fail to pick an option, you will have a regime in Tehran that has nuclear weapons. And if that's unattractive, imagine what the reaction will be. You think you can contain and deter this regime with nuclear weapons? I don't think so. I don't think the calculus they have is the same as we had during the Cold War with the Soviet Union. And even if it were, who wants to live under threat of nuclear annihilation? the focus of our policy has to be to stop the spread of nuclear weapons. And the very grave risk, the near certainty in my view, is that if this regime in Tehran gets nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia will get nuclear weapons, Egypt will get nuclear weapons, Turkey will get nuclear weapons, and perhaps others as well. So that in a relatively short period of time as these things go, 5 to 10 years, you could have half a dozen nuclear weapon states in the region. And that is a prescription for danger and instability and ultimately for nuclear holocaust. So what do we do? What do we do in response? Well, I think the first thing we do is decide that assisting the opponents of the regime in Tehran is in our national interest. Now, there are a variety of ways to do this. We want to be very careful that we don't give the regime the argument that somehow we're subverting the people of Iran. That's obviously not our intention. We don't want to taint anyone with our assistance. But the concern that the regime would use our assistance for propaganda is not an argument to do nothing. The regime's going to claim we're aiding the opposition whether we are or not. They've already done that. Look at what they did in the summer of 2009 following the manifestly fraudulent elections there when the people went out into the streets to protest. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's main talking point was they're there at the behest of the United States and the United Kingdom. Sadly, we know that's not true because we failed over a period of 20 years now to take the steps we should have been taking to aid the opposition. The opposition comes in a lot of different forms. And one of the central elements of the opposition has been the MEK. Now, I first came across the MEK when I was doing the arms control and international security job at the State Department because I was so concerned about Iran's nuclear weapons program. And this group that honestly I had never heard of before kept holding press conferences revealing aspects of the clandestine nuclear weapons effort. So I tried to learn more about it because much of what they said, while it confirmed what we believed from our own information, had not been made public. I have to say I was grateful they did make it public because it helped those of us who were concerned about Iran's progress demonstrate just how far along that they were. Now, I had a passion in the government to read intelligence, raw intelligence, intelligence analysis, anything I could get my hands on. So I read what I could read about the MEK. I don't claim that I've seen everything, but I haven't seen anything that justifies the MEK being on the list of foreign terrorist organizations. I looked when I was at the State Department in the absence of facts for reasons why the MEK might have been designated as a foreign terrorist organization. And as others have said today, there is simply no doubt that the principal motivating factor during the Clinton administration to add it to the list was the hope that the regime in Tehran would see that as a gift that would induce them into negotiations. That hope failed. A continuing hope during the Bush administration, right up until Secretary Rice's decision at the end of the administration to keep the MEK on the list, was the hope that it would induce the Iranian regime to negotiate over its nuclear weapons program. And that, too, has failed. We know that the director of counterterrorism at the end of the Bush administration and Secretary Rice's legal officer both argued with her as a matter of law and policy that the designation could not be sustained. She rejected that advice. We've got testimony from military officers who served in Iraq with responsibility for oversight over Camp Ashraf, who found not only an absence of information that would lead to a conclusion about support for terrorism, but precisely the opposite. So today, it seems to me that we are at a real crossroads to determine whether the whole process of listing foreign terrorist organizations is going to be true to its statutory basis, to let the facts fall where they may, or whether it's going to be continue to be corrupted by political motivations. I think it undercuts the whole credibility of our war on terrorism. If we're against terrorism, regardless of the political motivations of the terrorist, then we have to be in favor of understanding that people who are unfairly designated should be removed from the list. Now, Governor Rendell mentioned the 2 Americans who are being held hostage in Iran, the 2 hikers. I've heard Carter gossip at the State Department that obviously we want to get those 2 American citizens home. They're being unjustly held. I don't know why they were hiking near the border between Iran and Iraq. I don't know what's wrong with the Appalachian Trail. But in any event, it's the responsibility of the United States government to protect its citizens no matter how they got into trouble. And I think that, that we should welcome any possibility of their being released. But it is utterly inconsistent with our long-standing policy